You get up and howl about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. And I have chosen you to preach this evangel.
For all my free market healthcare robbing, stock stealing, retirement fund fucking with niggas. Fuck you little credit card scamming, jewelry stealing, crack selling, liquor store robbing motherfuckers. Shout to the homies, Carnegie, OG, Willie Randolph Hearst, Baruch, Rockefeller, the real Rockefeller, my main bitch Leona, pour out a little Louis XIII, Scott Rothstein, Jack Abramoff, hold your head, my Rothschild niggas, let's get this money. I spend my day pimping America overseas, pension for the workers, nigga please, embezzlement, etiquette, private settlement, I'm better with Confederate rhetoric from my mansion in Connecticut, foreclosed with big holes at the tenement, I twist words like a speech impediment, I hope you got good credit bitch, if not better get a new job with benefits, while I play golf with niggas to get cheddar with, new money buys brand new carrots, my old money bunch of great grandparents, you got grills in your mouth, I ain't mad at ya, I own every gold mine in South Africa. Thanks, baby, you made me $1 billion. Plus, I own a building for each one of my children's children.
All right, welcome to UCY.TV, folks. Tonight, voice of the Chris J. CIA. Hey, Chris.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Voice of Rebellion Radio. And indeed, tonight's show is going to go quite narco, as we're going to be talking about the drug trade and CIA involvement over the years and many of the different declassified information about the drug trade over the years and the secret parts that some people do know in the United States, but I think that an overwhelming majority still don't know. And it's definitely something that needs to be put out there. So I'll be putting out that information tonight. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Well, the first thing when we think about the drug trade, we think about countries like Mexico, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Colombia, and a lot of these Latin American countries where for many, many years there's been the cocaine trade and different drugs have been funneled through up to the United States, all starting from Colombia, and the drug routes starting there. But who was the ones that have been involved in these drug routes over the years? Who's been the ones actually making it very possible? And you see over the years, it seems that the part of the reason that the drug trade has been never quelled is because of the corrupt leaders that run the countries. And why is it that the United States, a country with one of the most powerful, or one of the most efficient intelligence agencies in collecting data and doing operations, and was one of the most powerful militaries on the planet, how have they not been able to stop the drug trade? Those cartels that, yes, they have powerful weapons and they do have intelligence of their own, but it still doesn't match up to the United States. And even to countries like Mexico, their military. And then you start to see over the years that there's been complicit actions from the people that are supposedly fighting these drug cartels, these cartels of death. It's actually a fact that more people are killed by the Mexican cartels, or more Americans are killed by the Mexican cartels than Americans have been killed by ISIS. And actually, more people, I think, have been killed in the same fashion, being beheaded by the Mexican cartels than have been beheaded by ISIS. And this just shows that the Mexican cartel is a serious threat to Americans, and is not really addressed on the media. It's never really addressed by the State Department or anything like that. And they try to make it seem like it's under control, but it's not under control. You see the real picture of what's happening in Mexico. You have the drug trade at all-time highs, and cartels control big parts of the territory of Mexico. And the cartels control big parts of, or have a lot of influence in the United States. And you start to see that the cartel isn't the cartel that we thought. Maybe these people are just subdivisions of a much larger cartel. a much larger agency that is allowing these smaller cartels to operate under their reign. We've seen over the years a lot of TV shows, a lot of stuff on the media, and it's almost been like glamorized, and in a way has been almost put in the same kind of like the drug cartels almost put in a similar like legendary status, almost like they almost make it seem like they know little about it, like it's a very secretive organization like the mafia. It's put into that same kind of esoteric status in this country when it comes to crime as the mafia were for many years, which, as we know, the mafia was the mayors of New York and such denied its existence for many years, that the mafia even existed while it was still operating in New York and other cities, and the government, for the most part, acted like it did not exist, but it really did exist. The Mexican cartels, I think that someone ignored how much power they have down there in Mexico, and the funny thing is that they've made of their top leader El Chapo, they've made him into kind of like a old west villain or something like that, and has kept him at this also like very mysterious figure with not too much known about him, just knowing that he's a eccentric drug cartel leader with possibly billions of dollars. And then you remember the biggest one, the Pablo Escobar, who made El Chapo look like a low-level worker practically when it comes to the amount of money that he was able to get. Pablo Escobar is regarded as the richest criminal in history, amassing $30 billion via the Medellin cartel down in Colombia, and bringing cocaine and practically dominating the entire cocaine trade in the 80s for the United States, which the United States in the 80s were consuming way more cocaine than any other country, and cocaine use was at all-time highs then in the 1980s. Now, different drugs are epidemics in this country. Now we have opium has become practically the drug of choice in the United States, and we have opium not being just used in this the form of heroin, but we have opium in this country being used in the form of pharmaceuticals. And then this comes into a new tie-in, and the pharmaceutical industry, who rely on the same plant, the poppy plant, to produce their synthetic heroin, which they call oxycodone and other painkillers, and these opiates. They're still coming from one of the most addictive and one of the most dangerous drugs on the planet, and it's coming from the same source as it's pretty much heroin, but it's synthetic. Heroin is already synthetic and refined from opium, but the pharmaceutically synthesized opium is this different form of heroin, pretty much, that's in pill form, that Americans in the last 15, 20 years have had a serious problem with, especially in states like Florida and other states where we've had practically almost like a legal trade of drugs via pill mills, which are technically legal establishments, legal pharmacies that have, by all means of the law, are allowed to run. And then we've also had another thing is that we've had on the streets pills have been dealt, because the thing is that people are able to get them at whatever price, at a very low price inside the pill mill, and then they're able to sell it on the street for 20, 25 times the pharmaceutical or the pharmacy value on the street value. The pharmaceutical pills are oftentimes selling at $1 million a kilo and stuff like that, which is way higher than cocaine or marijuana, which marijuana is at only like a few $1,000s a kilo or so. So the amount of lucrativeness, the lucrative nature of pharmaceuticals pills have drawn a mass interest of people willing to deal them on the streets. And now the pharmaceutical industry will act like, well, this is just an unfortunate mishap. This is what happens with these pills. But they don't realize, or people don't realize, the pharmaceutical industry is feeding an entire drug market out there on the streets for their products, and their drugs that they make are more addictive than practically for almost all the illegal drugs. It's really to the same addictiveness as heroin, which is notoriously addictive. and they've had these pills have had thousands and thousands dead, and at the same time, this country allows those to be legal, but fights every state, every major movement for marijuana to even be decriminalized or made for medical marijuana. And it's put at the same Schedule 1, which is the same illegality as heroin and also hallucinogens, oddly enough, are also at Schedule 1, which I don't agree necessarily with the use, or definitely not the casual use of LSD and stuff like that, but it's definitely a lot less harmful than heroin or anything like that. And to put it at Schedule 1, to put hallucinogens and marijuana at Schedule 1, is I think to put psilocybin mushrooms at Schedule 1 is which I think it is at federal level in some states. Oddly enough, Florida is the only state, and this is a little FYI to the Florida listeners, it's the only state that technically it is legal to possess psilocybin mushrooms legally in the state of Florida. It's a little uniqueness of the law here in Florida. But in most states, in 49 states, they're illegal to possess. And hallucinogens are treated just as bad as heroin, according to the government, even though that they do have medicinal abilities, as has been proven by different scientific studies, to being able to help soldiers with PTSD problems and such, and many other mental problems and stuff like that. It seems to be where these mushrooms and stuff are able to help. And of course, the many uses of marijuana, 34 compounds of cancer can be treated, and also the was the 34 compounds of cancer that can be treated. Many diseases such as glaucoma, many mental illnesses. I mean, it's probably the most medicinal thing on the planet, plant-wise. Anything that actually grows, marijuana is the most medicinal thing that exists, but yet is treated at this extreme level of illegality, not just us in the United States, and it's actually worse in some other countries, and it seems to be America's allies a lot of times are more strict than even America themselves. For example, in Saudi Arabia, I think it's a executable offense there, possession of marijuana, and in Japan is a long jail sentence no matter the amount, which it is in that way in some places in the United States. The United States does have some of the strictest laws versus a plant, but at the same time has a very lenient laws against the pharmaceutical industry, that they get away with killing thousands of people due to side effects or due to overdoses on their drugs, but they don't get any reprimands or anything like that, and they continue to be some of the most profitable industries in the United States. And the big question now, people will complain oftentimes that about the prices too, and it's not just the prices. It's just that should this even be pushed on the patients altogether in the first place? But yes, that's the horrible thing, is that they're giving these things that a lot of times some of these pills have almost no use and or do a lot more bad than they do good. Like what comes to mind is antidepressants. A lot of times, ultimately, do the opposite of what the supposed pill is, or what the pill is supposed to do. And they charge them ridiculous amounts. Sometimes they'll charge hundreds of dollars on a pharmaceutical pill, hundreds of dollars per pill. We saw what happened shortly with the Martin Shkreli, and he raised the prices of his HIV medication up to $750 after he was able to receive a monopoly via the United States government, and then he raised it but then somebody else was able to manufacture the pill, and they brought it down to like $1, which is close to the normal price. I mean, he shot it up way up there, pretty much just because he could, and now he's actually in jail. I think he made the government put him in jail because he exposed how bad the pharmaceutical industry. He became such a bad pharmaceutical CEO that he became notorious, and he revealed just some of the corruption that is in the pharmaceutical industry, rather than do really bad stuff but stay in the shadow about it. That way people don't really know too much about the pharmaceutical industry. Like Martin Shkreli, he really just bragged about it and stuff like that. He was known as the pharma bro, and an absolutely disgusting individual, I have to admit, considering that what he did But this is just a little tidbit about the entire industry altogether. The pharmaceutical industry is one of the most powerful lobbying groups in America, one of the most powerful industries in America, and it has many victims and it's even rumored that not only do they kill people via the pills that they sell to people, they kill people that talk about the corruption inside their industry, with many suspicious circumstances around the doctors that have been that have pushed alternative remedies and stuff like that. A lot of them have had very weird stuff happen to them shortly after. And in that sense, the pharmaceutical cartel works no different than the Mexican cartel. And people don't see it just because the Mexican cartel wears bandanas and wife beater shirts, while the pharmaceutical cartel, they wear suits and ties and white lab coats. But if you leave their attire aside and you look at their tactics, you just realize that all it is between the pharmaceutical cartel and the Mexican cartel, and the thing that sets them apart is that one does it in a more professional-looking way, in a polished way, while the other one does it with brute force and a lot more publicized about their brutality. The Mexican cartel, of course. And these are drug cartels across South America operate in that fashion. But the pharmaceutical cartel, which you'll find here in America, was major companies. Then when you have like Pfizer that won't even pay taxes. They've moved their company headquarters, I think, to Ireland, so they won't have to pay taxes. Now they're not paying taxes. They're making tons of money off of killing people. And also, you have to remember that a lot of times these pharmaceutical companies, by having that prices, they're denying a lot of poor people from their actual pills that do work from getting them. For example, like what happened with the Shkreli case, where it was up to $750 a pill for people in a country where there's a lot of people that have HIV, or with all these other ailments. But I think what also needs to go back to the mindset of Americans is, why do we have a culture where we accept? We don't just only have it, but we just seem to accept this as a fact that you will get sick at some point in your lifetime, and you're going to have all these ailments, and then everybody, we have a country where like 25% of this country is mentally ill. We have a ton more physically ill, a lot of them overlapping, of course, mentally and physically ill to one extent or another. At least, no, I'm not saying they're completely insane or, anything like that, or having rage fits or anything, like very obviously mentally ill. I'm talking about the 25% that in this country that have some kind of thing. They have a sleep disorder, they have a bipolar depression, anything like that. And what causes this? What causes all these mental illnesses in our society? And we have to really look at that. Our society in general, this Orwellian state is definitely starting to get to people. It's starting to get the psyche of people, and it's breaking them down. And the whole culture is just unhealthy. And we have a very fake, artificial culture with our fake foods. We have our foods that are so artificial, so so much with GMOs, and so and it's really it's really again, you're going back to the societal questions about, we have a country where we have so many people sick one way or another, and we just accept it. We just say, oh, we'll just take a pill for it. Why don't we have a preventive mentality? Why don't we try? Why isn't it promoted to get to the root of the problem before you have to take pills? Why it's like, oh, take a pill for sleeping, take a pill for the focus, take a pill to relax, take a pill to get energized, take a pill to go for a run, take a pill to go to sleep. Well, I already said take a pill to go to sleep. Take a pill to be able to deal with bright lights. Take a pill to get a boner. Take a pill to build your muscles. Take a pill to for your heart. I mean, there's a pill for everything in this country, and they sell it all the time on the television. It's absolutely sickening that we allow this. That we allow the pharmaceuticals to sell their drugs, which are more dangerous many times than illegal drugs, on the television, and sometimes on channels with many kids will be watching. So you're not just selling them to parents selling them to kids, and we have this country where we're pushing all these pills on children. It's the Ritalin, which is practically like giving kids methamphetamine. I mean, it might not be to the same extreme, unrefined example, but it's it's just synthesized differently and a little bit toned down, but it's still practically the same as methamphetamine when you talk about the physical compound of Ritalin. And one of the most alarming things I found out about Ritalin is that they actually flavor these. They actually flavor Ritalin like grape and orange and stuff like that to market it to kids, and to make it more for kids to like it, because it's just like candy. It's just it's just like having Skittles or something like that. But it's very powerful drugs that they're giving these kids, and it really is setting them down a track of doing drugs for the rest of their life. And whether it will be the pharmaceutical companies' drugs or it will be drugs out on the streets, which is now we're seeing a lot of going back and forth, because we have this right now. We're having this epidemic where people that used to be on the pharmaceutical drugs, now that the pill mills have shut down, a lot of them have resorted to going to heroin, which is practically the same thing that they were doing before. So now you have just people going straight from the pharmaceutical opiates to heroin. And it should be questioned, why do we even let the pharmaceutical companies make such a terrible drug? But the only thing that's different is that it's synthesized different. Was the synthetic heroin that's being sold still to this day with oxycodone and other drugs. We're going to continue to see horrible problems as drug epidemics in this country, and then we have all these other drugs circulating in this country as well. I mean, we have, for example, Molly is a big one that circulates around, and is a party drug, but a lot of times it just absolutely laces methamphetamine, and so you actually have, there's really two big crises in America. So we have a heroin and meth crisis in the United States, and it's been almost like it's almost like joked about. With this Breaking Bad TV show where they almost like glamorize the meth trade in America. I mean, it definitely turns it into something that they don't really show. I don't think that you could say that it's gritty all you want, but it'll never be as gritty. The show's over now, but it was never as gritty as it actually is, and how bad really the trade of methamphetamine is, and how low some of these people that are pushing it are. And we have a lot of very poor Americans in this country that have gotten hooked on that, and people out in the Appalachia, it seems to be where a lot of the epidemic has struck, and it's all kind of goes back to just the culture that's being pushed by the commercialization from a young age of drugs like the Ritalin and other pharmaceutical drugs that leads to adults later using hardcore drugs and becoming drug addicts later. And which then they'll later lock you up for years and years and years when you're caught either selling or possessing. Which, again, this is the one of the most fucked up things about the drug laws in America is that you'll get less time if you're caught dealing with a very dangerous and addictive drug of methamphetamine on the streets than you would if you get charged with selling the non-harmful and non-addictive drug of marijuana on the streets. Will give you less time for the methamphetamine than we will with the marijuana, and that's why you have people dealing the same amount, and also the same amount is way more money that you can receive. I mean, you could make a few batches, and you have hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of dollars on your hands with not too much effort. With marijuana, I mean, you're going to be selling for a long time if you're actually going to get to that point of making hundreds of thousands, $1 million. And here's what I have to say is that why it should be legal, not just to possess, not just for people to use, but it should be legal to grow, sell, and do whatever the hell you want with it. It should be treated just like a plant. And Texas had a law like that that I was pretty impressed by. that was going to be treated just like tomatoes or lettuce or anything like that, and it did fall through, I believe. But I think that's how it should be dealt with. It shouldn't even be like the Colorado rules where you have to go get a license, and if you get caught doing it anywhere but the porch of your house, you're going to get in trouble. You have to be 21, which I think that's ridiculous. I think you should be 18. You're an adult. You can do what you want at that point, and I think that, and I believe this is also a major fallacy to me, is that when the government says that you can go off to war and die for a corporate war for the Zionists at 18, but they say you can't have a beer at 18. You have to wait till you're 21. See, it's like, I think that this marijuana rules that say that use is not allowed by anyone under 21 is ridiculous, but it's not. It's almost not as ridiculous though as all the other stuff, all these limits on what they can sell. If they use the wrong bank or something, they can get in trouble or they'll lose their money because the banks they can't even use the banks because the banks are federal ran, and the federal government they're abiding by the FDIC laws, so you're not even allowed to put your money there. So there's all these different laws. I think it should just be 100% across the country. No more regulations whatsoever. The only thing I would say is May can't be sold to people under 18. I don't know but besides that, there really is no rule that should be. There should be no rule on how much, when, where, why. They put a regulation on all this stuff there, but then when they had the pill mill problem, there was none of that being asked. It was like, oh, you're just going to sell pharmaceuticals to people. Okay, here you go. Here's your license to run one of these, and good luck. And then they just stock up and sell tons of pharmaceuticals that would eventually end up killing a lot of people. So a lot of times from that same pill mill, many people would overdose from the pills that they were selling. There was none of those questions going on because the pharmaceutical cartel has its interest in Washington, D.C., and the United States government. The marijuana does not. They don't have the lobby in there. And the United States government is not totally against the sale of marijuana because when they is the sale, they want to be in charge of it. And now we're going to go into a little bit more conspiracy side of all this, because I say a lot of stuff that probably a lot of people already know, is that the thing is that the cartel and the United States government are not separate as you may think. When I'm talking about the cartel, I mean the Mexican cartel and the United States government and these other cartels south of the border, and just drug cartels in general around the world, but I'll mostly focus on the ones south of the border, the Mexican cartel and the cartels in South America. And, of course, isn't that we're talking about the world order, talking about the United States government, all the secrecy, all the secret foreign policy that the New World Order in the United States have been involved in. And we talk about the secret policy, foreign policy that they've been involved in. And here's one more, is that the drug trade throughout South America, and this really goes back to the 70s. It was the Mujahideen, or not the Mujahideen, wrong place. But, that's not, that will eventually tie into the drug trade, but that's a different place in the world. Talk about in the 70s, in like the 80s, was the Contra rebels and all that, and there was the Iran-Contra scandal got tied into that, and that's where one of the first times I think that American people actually saw with their own eyes their government admitting what they've been involved with for a long time, that the United States government admitted that they are behind the trade of drugs around the world, and that the United States government admitted to some extent that at least there on that trade going from Colombia up to the United States, that right there in Nicaragua, their guys, the Contra rebels, were involved with drug trade, in the drug trade, and that there was cocaine being helped by the CIA to help the Contra rebels go from Colombia to Mexico, and that they were helping definitely in Nicaragua. But that's not the only place they were helping. We have to be a fool to believe that was just only happening at one instance in that one country. But it has been going on in all these different countries for many years, not just in the 80s. And Oliver North and admitted it, and Reagan denied it 100% and tried to act like he had no knowledge, but you know that he probably had knowledge. And many of the government officials had knowledge of what exactly was going on right there. The Contra rebels were known to be nothing more than a mercenary group, and they were terrorists. They were mercenary right-wing terrorists who relied mainly for funding, selling drugs, and selling cocaine specifically, and trafficking it through Nicaragua from their connection in Panama, where the Panamanian government, Noriega, was directly involved in the trafficking in drugs up through Panama. And then south of there was Colombia, where the Medellin cartel controlled big parts of Colombia and other paramilitaries and such, and the Colombian government's involvement. And this drug trade was starting there, went through Panama, up through Nicaragua, up into the northern Central America, where there's other similar groups and dictatorships where they were helping the trafficking of drugs up through Mexico, where the Mexican government act like they've been fighting drug cartels for all this time, but the truth is that they never really have been fighting the drug cartels. That's not in the Mexican government's interest to fight the drug cartels. And actually, having this boogeyman out there like El Chapo that they play over and over again, saying you guys need us to protect you from boogeymen like El Chapo, and that's kept the Mexican government from probably being overthrown many years ago, because there's this fear that if the Mexican government falls apart, that the drug cartels will take over. But they don't realize that the drug cartels are already in power in Mexico. That Peña Nieto right now is working directly with the drug cartels. And now it's even on the mainstream media. They're saying that the Mexican military watched it all go down. They watched those students be led onto that bus that was being led onto a bus that was being drove by the cartel members before they were being slaughtered. The Ayotzinapa, which we had a show on just a few months ago. Peña Nieto right now is the one that's in charge of the Mexican drug trade, and he's probably making a lot of money off of by allowing these drug cartels to operate inside of Mexico. And right now, it's probably the same way as going on in a few of the Central American countries this day. Now there's a little bit of complication because the people that were fighting the Contras, the Sandinistas, are in power in Nicaragua, and you see that countries that the United States very strongly condemns. And the funny thing is, they try to turn it on them and try to say, well, those people, the left-wing revolutionaries throughout South America, they're the ones responsible for the trafficking in drugs. We don't have any involvement of it. We're not working with any cartels. They're working with cartels. They put these baseless articles and stuff like that, and baseless accusations against it that most people ignore because they realize it's a lot of baloney. And especially, it sounds like baloney when it's coming from a country that a lot of people around the world know that the United States government is involved in the drug trade, and south of the border, and the Middle East, and just all around the world. The CIA is the biggest drug cartel on the planet. The Cocaine Importation Agency, as it should be called. Which there's many actually acronyms that could be called. The Cocaine Importation Agency, the Criminal Importation Agency, because the CIA was very much responsible for the importation of Nazi criminals after World War II. Just many different terms, I guess, that would better adequately describe the CIA. But also the Central Intelligence Agency is a pretty good term for it, because that's what they're doing. They're taking intelligence and taking information from the people from people around the world and from their own people here in the United States, with the help of the NSA and other things. But for many years, the drug trade has been a problem in South America and Central America, and people like Peña Nieto, puppet leaders, and have done nothing about it for many years. People like Noriega, in the end, America and puts in jail because they needed a fall guy, and Noriega was a fall guy. after all the controversy that happened during the Iran-Contra scandal and such, and all the talk about the Contra rebels, that they've decided that they'll just put Noriega in jail instead of actually have to face it themselves. And Noriega was Noriega. Some say that he actually was put in jail because he was somewhat getting close to maybe betraying the United States, and then Noriega was going to move over maybe to the Castro sphere of Latin American politics. But I don't really believe that too much. I think that Noriega just was probably taking a little bit too much money that he was supposed to, or than he was supposed to. He probably was wanting more of the cut than the United States wanted for him to receive. And then in the end, they just decided it would be easier on their profits to get rid of him, put him in jail, rather than try to keep him under control. And they replaced him with a very similar type of government later. It's just that Noriega was more of a flamboyant military dictator. Now it's just a silent dictatorship instead of Panama. Panama, though, has developed quite a bit over the last 25 years, but they still remain under a pretty restrictive rule, and it ultimately goes back into the Operation Condor policy that doesn't really seem to have left Panama ever. Operation Condor being the United States having dictators that they remotely control, pretty much so they don't have to go there and control it themselves. They have their dictators in place to control it remotely, which does not seem to be the case there in Panama, or just in many South American countries over the years. And now we're seeing it with Macri, which that's what's also very alarming about what seems to be a return of Operation Condor, is that South America, which had a lot of success against drug cartels in the last 15 years or so, will now will have some of the same struggles that they had for many years. And leaders are just going to allow the cartels back in their countries, back into Argentina, back into Paraguay. And South America is ultimately the start of the drug trade, because that's where all the coca plants and many distribution centers are in South America, and South American countries rather than Central America or Mexico. So that South America is the gateway to the Central America, Mexico, and then eventually to the United States. And was a country that has such a United States being has such a tight border control, at least the checkpoints, and then there's all these drugs going right through the border checkpoints every day. It doesn't seem like a farce that the United States claims to be against the drug trade when they could stop it so easily, or they could actually just be tough on the border, and the United States could easily close it down if they actually wanted to. Imagine if they just had bases out there and to do regular patrols, and that anybody that was identified positively of being belonging to a cartel was immediately arrested and or shot. Simple as that. No letting people go, no chasing people, and then let them keep running. I'm not saying talk about the stopping of illegal immigrants. I'm saying the stopping of cartel, which we see that the government has allowed a lot of cartel in this country because you see them on the other side. Nobody knows how they got to the other side, but you know that they crossed illegally, and it's because we're just having an open door policy towards them. And the government loves it for many different ways. Even when the people are caught and when they put them in jail, there's more money going to the government because court cases and all that, lawyers, that all is a lot of money that generates money. When this revenue coming in whenever that they arrest somebody, and they do these periodic arrests of higher level drug dealers, I think mostly for show, and also the police departments, they almost sometimes become so corrupt that they work like competing narcotic narcotic cartels, where they're just the only reason that they are actually going after the guy, like you see in the movie Training Day about the LAPD in the 90s, is that they want to rob the guy of his money and then take it for themselves, not give it back to the community, not because they want to actually serve justice, but purely because they're thinking about the big paycheck they'll get or that they'll get it back by equipment or new cars or whatever. Ultimately, narcotic agencies become very much involved in the drug trade, and in these border towns or towns not too far away from the border, when you have L.A. or maybe like Flagstaff now, Arizona has become a lot more cartel members are in Arizona and Southern California. It's almost caught up to like the amount of cartel members that used to be like in Southern California are now in Arizona or Santa Fe. New Mexico has a lot of cartel members there as well there. And the cartel and the United States government's in cooperation was declassified somewhat in 2010 when we had Operation Fast and Furious, where they had these documents showing about the scandal about Fast and Furious, documents showing Operation Fast and Furious, which was giving guns to drug cartel members, and then the only defense that they had is that they said that, well, we were going to go trace the guns and go find these guys. But it sounds like an idiotic policy which only has one intention, which one intention was to help drug cartels was to keep their power in Mexico, which drug cartels really don't need much more help doing that, because you see that they pretty much control giant areas of Mexico. And the streets of Mexico are being littered with the bodies of the people that they killed down there. For all the Americans that they killed, they've killed way more Mexicans than their own people. Down in Mexico, thousands and thousands of people have been killed by the drug cartel, and ultimately, the U.S. government was giving them guns and helping them fight against the people, really, and just reassert their dominance over the different regions of Mexico, and just giving them power to fight. I don't know why they would even need the guns at that point, or need more guns. I guess they might be thinking that they'll have to be getting into a fight after a revolution happens or something, or that they'll be having to fight the people if they rise up. Once people have already found out now that Peña Nieto, what he's been involved into. That was the big thing about the Ayotzinapa. It was kind of a breakthrough that down the mass consciousness of Mexico shifted, and now they are realizing that the Mexican government is as corrupt as it has been shown in movies and stuff like that in the past and been rumored to be. It wasn't just a joke. It wasn't just something in action movies or whatever about the corruption of the officials inside of Mexico. And that for all these years, yes, it was, as the rumors showed, that they were very much involved in the drug trade, and that they were these egotistical psychopaths that were inside of the Mexico City. And I think a lot of Mexicans must have already known that, because they were under for 71 years. They didn't even leave the same party. They were controlled by the same party that controls Mexico today, the PRI. And then for a few years, they let it go to another party, but it was practically like the same party. There was Felipe Calderon, and then went to Peña Nieto, which Peña Nieto is part of the PRI party, the same one that was controlled Mexico for 71 years. Vicente Fox was the first one that was outside the PRI to become president of Mexico. He became the president of Mexico in 2000, which he's shown up back on the spotlight because he says that because of his humorous comments about Trump building the wall and having Mexico pay for it. He says that we're not going to pay for the fucking wall. But funny thing about that is that he doesn't really have much to say so on if Mexico's going to pay for a wall like of that nature, because he's not the president anymore. And I don't know if he would actually, whatever negotiation tactics that Trump or whatever would be able to put down, I don't know if Vicente Fox could handle it necessarily. Peña Nieto, people think that Mexico, in whatever proposal that the United States will give to them in the future, will be able to negotiate out of it or whatever. But I don't see Peña Nieto being able to handle a very tough negotiator. Doesn't really seem to be very intimidating at all physically. But what's intimidating is his military and all the cartels that he has a grasp on. And Peña Nieto a lot of people know in Mexico that he's a dictator. And there's a possibility that Peña Nieto might not even face a 2018 election. That's very much possible, especially that he believes that he's going to lose, which he will lose in 2018 at this point, unless something very miraculous happens for the Peña Nieto government. They won't win the 2018's election, and it's very surprising. It would be pretty surprising just to see Peña Nieto even make it the election without being impeached or overthrown, because they were even burning down one of the governor's houses in one of the states of Mexico. And yeah, Mexico has states just like the United States. In one of the states of Mexico, the governor's house actually got burnt down. So the people are not scared to attack government buildings and stuff like that. It's like, I don't get here in the United States, but they seem to be too afraid ourselves to do stuff like that. Because when we had a protest here, people are burning down local bakeries and stuff like that, but they're not going after government buildings. The people that are responsible, when they start rioting this country, they start indiscriminately attacking whatever. They end up attacking sometimes small businesses and stuff like that, which have no responsibility for what they're angry at. And in Mexico, in other third world countries, they're not afraid to do stuff like that. And that's the spirit that's been right now. Ayotzinapa kind of fallen out of the TVs of Mexico. Russian guys, it's been over a year since it's happened. But now with these new revelations that are coming out, with the mainstream media almost being forced to cover it about the truth about Ayotzinapa and the fact that the Mexican military admits they witnessed it go down, they did nothing to actually stop it from going down, then made them, the Mexican people are going to get very angry again. And this is 100 years after the first Mexican Revolution. In fact, 1917 will be, I think 1917 will mark the 100 years anniversary of or actually, I think it was 1921. But the first Mexican Revolution wasn't really successful because it ended up in the long run with the PRI taking over. But what it did do is that it eliminated Spanish rule of lands that the Spanish had never given up after independence. But what also happened is that after the revolution, Mexico fell into kind of an economic despair that they never really were able to recover from. And as some of you might know, is that Mexico was once more powerful than the United States and was pretty much like a first country, and had an empire back in the 1800s that stretched all the way from northern California, all the way from North California, all the way south to Colombia. The border was Colombia, so all the way from the border was Oregon of today, which back then was the Oregon country, which was controlled by the British. And we're talking about the mid-1800s here, before the Mexican-American War, all the way down to the border was Colombia. That was the Mexican Empire. And then by 1945, just 100 years later, after almost 50 years of the 20th century had went by, Mexico was in a much different situation. It fell into a status of a third world country. And nowadays, it's not very impressive economically or standard of living or anything like that. But just 150 years ago, they were one of the most powerful countries on the planet. It's an interesting story. What happened is after the Mexican-American War, and all the territory was ceded over. All the territory, of course, north of where Mexico is today, was ceded over. That was a giant piece of their territory. And they lost over the years Central American countries that are now independent, which used to control all of Central America. It was like you went at one point, Mexico and Colombia were actually neighbors. Which now there's quite a few countries separating Mexico and Colombia, well, the entire region that we now know as Central America. And at one point, Mexico and Canada were almost bordering neighbors. That's Mexico and British territory. Really, in a way, I mean, that British territory was connected to British Canada. So in a way, it was like Mexico was bordering Canada at the time. There was also a time when they still had Russian going all the way down the west coast. And that was a time when still the Europeans still had quite a bit of claim on the North American continent. There used to be Russia, there used to be France, there used to be, a long time ago, the Netherlands were here. There was, of course, the English and, of course, the Spanish. The Portuguese were not here in the United States, but they were over in South America, which now we know is Brazil. Of course, European countries hadn't even quite left yet in 1850. It was until really 1867 was when Canada declared independence, which now next year will be 150 years after, is when Europe was for the most part, was off the North American continent. But throughout those years of Mexico falling into somewhat of disarray, a new trade comes up, and also with a lot of people flocking to the United States, this trade sees an opportunity. The drug cartel sees bringing these drugs to the United States via the people fleeing to Mexico, or fleeing from Mexico to the United States, and that they would just disguise themselves into the population running from the Mexican territory up to the United States. And it really didn't become a huge problem until around the 60s, 70s, really more like the 70s and 80s. And when the United States quickly became the biggest consumer of cocaine on the planet and had unprecedented amounts. And then also another cartel, not just the Mexican cartel, comes up, but we forget about a huge one, the Miami cartel, or the Miami Cuban cartel, but they would have a huge influence in Miami during the 80s because of their involvement in the sale of cocaine. And then a third cartel, the Medellin cartel, which was controlled by no other than Pablo Escobar, and they joined the scene in the same territory as the Cuban cartel. And you have the Cuban and the Colombian cartel on the streets of Miami with armored vehicles and all out turf war going on inside of Miami. And the Cuban cartel, it could have been avoided. The Cuban cartel comes to the United States, but it was a policy. Well, we accepted in 1980. We took in tons of Cuban refugees, mostly right-wing Cubans. And we forget that. I don't think that the government forgot that that who these people were, and that the fact that in the crowd, or one of the biggest enemies to Castro was the Cuban cartel. And then we brought all these prisoners, and not every prisoner in Cuba was a political prisoner. Not even close. In fact, there is no political at this point. There is no political prisoners in Cuba. But at that time in the 80s, they brought all these prisoners over, and Castro unloaded the jails in America, took all these prisoners into the United States, and what was many of them having very serious offenses that they had committed down in Cuba, and many of them belonging to the Cuban cartel. We practically shipped into the Cuban cartel into Miami, and then Miami would end up being the hosting site for a major turf war between them and the Colombian cartel, and become a very bloody thing for the next few years. With 500 murders a year going on in Miami, and then, of course, that was glamorized, and that seems to be America for you. Is that these horrible things would be going on with the methamphetamine crisis inside the United States in the last 10 years, or the heroin crisis inside the United States the last 10 years, and they'll make a damn TV show about it. And like what they did with the Miami Vice and all that. And they glamorized was ultimately the destruction and the tearing apart of the Latin community inside of Miami. And ultimately, now it's going to be forever perverted by that. By the fact that they let the Cuban cartel, they've allowed a lot of I don't know if that was really the starting point. I mean, Miami now it's like the exile of some of the worst people from Latin America get sent to Miami from whatever country when they get kicked out. We've had, for example, Venezuelan terrorists that were involved in the fascist riots and stuff like that in Venezuela against the Chavistas. They eventually run to Miami when they're avoiding persecution or avoiding prosecution, I should say. or the Colombian cartel members, the Cuban cartel members, or even like for I think some of the coup plotters inside of Venezuela who were trying to install a fascist government illegally ended up running to Miami before they could be caught down there in Venezuela. So Miami it ended up becoming like this tainted land of, I'm not saying this is everybody lives there, but I'm just saying that there's a lot of these very ugly people inside the community of Miami now, and it's not very well. It's not when you talk about it down, for example, if you were to talk about it in the streets of Caracas or something like that, they would say it's a nice place and looks nice and there's a lot of good people. They would also mention about it's a very dangerous place and it's very and it has these people inside of it, and that it ultimately it's kind of like still to this day some of the Wild West. In the 80s it was a complete Wild West. I mean, you have criminals going around in armored vehicles, your Colombian and Cuban cartels going around fighting for the city, and there ends up in 500 murders a year. It's a war zone. It got turned into a war zone temporarily, and you have and there's these untold stories about in the Midwest. You have these very violent cartel members that are being allowed up into the cities. Like right now, Cincinnati's became a major. I think Cincinnati's became a major drug hub now, and it's like a straight shot. Like or they come like straight diagonally, and that's where they end up in. It's the Midwest, and they end up in Cincinnati now that the heroin trade has become huge inside the Midwest. And it just goes back to why is this all happening? And again, it is the fact that our government has no intentions of shutting down the real drug trade, because our government works with the cartels that are the origination of the cartel of these drugs coming inside the United States, and they have been. Just look at the Contra rebels. Look at the drug trade in the 80s, and the fact that it was practically revealed on national television when Oliver North admitted that our government was involved in the drug trade and bringing drugs from South America to the United States. It's no secret. There's absolutely no secret what our government's involved in. People that they have the cognitive dissonance and believe that. And I don't know. It's just like even on national television they said it and they still didn't believe it. So what more do they want? What more do they want to see before they actually believe what our government's involved in? Or maybe they do believe it, but they just believe they can't do anything about it. And one thing we need to do is we need to change our mentality. We need to get away from the mentality that the pharmaceutical companies and stuff have pushed on people. We need to, we really need to get up in arms about the fact that they're pushing from very young ages. The ultimate gateway drug is Ritalin. No matter what people say, that is the gateway drug. Marijuana is not a gateway drug. Ritalin, I mean, there's two gateway drugs really: alcohol and Ritalin. And Ritalin is the ultimate gateway drug because usually 9-year-olds aren't drinking alcohol, but they are possibly doing Ritalin. That's the very first thing they're going to do like that in their life, and it's going to set their mindset for later on. They're going to end up on it's practically a methamphetamine, so they'll be more susceptible to doing speeds, and just ultimately, since they are unknowingly abusing a substance as a kid, their brain will be rewired to the fact that abusing a substance as an adult won't seem like abusing a substance, but they will be doing substance abuse because it's been programmed by the casual use of it when they were kids, and they make it way too casual. And again, the flavoring the pills, grape and orange, to appeal to kids is just so wrong and shouldn't even be allowed. And just the whole way the pharmaceutical companies together shouldn't be allowed, but that's the reality in the United States, and that's the reality of the Western world, and the reality of Mexico, or the Mexican cartel, and the U.S. government cooperation when the United States government is giving guns to the Mexican cartel. They are giving assistance to the Mexican cartel, and it's funny how quickly they shut that down. And eventually, the guy, the Department of Justice leader during the Operation Fast and Furious scandal came about, eventually resigned. Eric Holder, who he had some very very low moments in his last few years as the Department of Justice head. I mean, remember when he went to Ferguson and tried to calm them down, those protesters, those activists, very angry, those people that were fighting police brutality, and they were actually standing up to the government in a way. A lot of the protesters were actual protesters, and not all of them were looting, not all of them were thugs, like was being portrayed in the media. And Eric Holder goes there, and he's trying to calm them down, trying to turn them over to, stop being angry at the government. And he says, "Oh, I'm a black man. I'm not angry at the government." It's pretty much what he says. By going there, he had no place going there. And then it's actually funny that's also where we saw the fake civil rights activist Jesse Jackson was sent home after that. They said they told him to get the hell out of Ferguson when he showed up, because they realized that he's all about money and he's not actually about justice or civil rights or any of that. That he's long ago. And remember, I said, didn't he run for president like in 1984 or something like that? Which I said Jesse Jackson. It's kind of like the same effect. But some people have compared it, the Sanders presidency, presidential run, and the Jesse Jackson run, is that they're both seemingly progressive, seemingly somewhat radical candidates, but in the long run, they're sellouts. I mean, Bernie Sanders, there's no way he can justify the support of. He supported the funding of the Iraq War 4 times. He supported Serbia and Yugoslavia, what happened there, and he supports intervention in Syria against Assad. And he actually said, he actually uttered out the words when talking about his plan for ISIS, that he'll just let Saudi Arabia fight ISIS. That's not a strategy. That's just letting ISIS win, because everybody in the world knows that Saudi Arabia is working with ISIS. The only thing that's a secret now is the United States and Israel's involvement. But Turkey and Saudi Arabia's involvement, I mean, you have to be a fool at this point to not know that they're involved. Turkey and Saudi Arabia is involved in the funding of ISIS. And I think that you almost have to be, at this point, a fool not to think that the law enforcement of the United States is not somewhat involved in the trafficking of drugs to one extent or another here in the United States, whether it's not the complete control of the trade or allowing stuff to happen, allowing some of the trade to happen. I think at this point we should look at the CIA. And I talked about earlier about the bigger cartels that controls the little smaller cartels that we see on TV, like El Chapo. El Chapo is not the leader of any cartel because he's being controlled by a bigger cartel. And that bigger cartel is the CIA. They're ultimately the ones that are facilitating the drug trade, not just in South America, not just in Mexico, but just all around the world. But what comes to mind is, of course, the South American and Mexican trade. Anyways, if anyone wants to call in, our phone lines are open, 718-717-8296. That again, 718-717-8296. Here, Voice on Radio. Also, and at the same time of all this, it's one of the most things isn't that one of those things that police departments pride themselves on, and they try to justify their jobs, is that they say that they're going after drug dealers, but you see what ultimately happens, especially in the big cities, where the narcotics agencies are very corrupt, and they're just bringing a lot of the money, making backdoor deals with the drug dealers and stuff like that. Or and then sometimes it's dealing with when they're supposed to be doing their jobs, with the how they deal with taken down some of the drug kingpin stuff like that when they want to take the money. Usually that's what's the main motivation towards doing it. A lot of times, if they want for an informant, they'll use somebody that was charged for some smaller charge. Sometimes somebody that got charged for selling marijuana or whatever will be used as the informant to take down the real drug kingpin. And then sometimes they get killed. And then, well, that's just, what happens when you're a confidential informant, is what they'll say. They're not going to have any remorse or anything for sending you there. They're just going to say that's what happened, and that you chose that to happen to you because you didn't want to do some ridiculous sentence, and they give some offer you can't refuse. Instead of doing 5 years, maybe they reduce your sentence way down to like 18 months or something like that if you just hand over some information, but then you get caught wearing a wire and then you get popped in the head. No joke, especially in the bigger cities. And say like Chicago, so where a lot of the crime could be prevented from one simple factor. Let's look at one major statistic about America, and this is different. They talk about the drug trade, talk about the gun control in this country, is that people say that gun control will less crime will happen. It's what they believe. It's ridiculous. With the city in the United States, we have, I think we have the fourth highest murders per capita in the world in the United States. However, if we just took away 4 cities in the United States, I think it's like New Orleans, Chicago, Philadelphia, and Dallas, something like that. If we just took those 4 cities away, all of a sudden we would have the 4th lowest murders per capita in the world. And it's just 4 cities right there. So that's a 444. And what these 4 cities have in common is that those 4 cities have some strictest gun control laws in the country. And then you look at places that have very lenient gun laws, or perhaps even there's some cities in America actually I think that actually I know there's a city that got famous in Georgia that actually not only are they lenient on gun laws, they force people to have gun ownership, which I think is questionable because I don't think people should be forced into owning a gun, but definitely, I saw that the crime definitely went down in this place because if a criminal knows that everyone has a gun, they're not going to try their luck. But if they know that nobody has a gun because all their guns have been taken away, then they have a free reign. And how the criminals still have a gun? Because they're an outlaw. They don't live inside the law. And you think that they'll be able to take away their guns just because it's simply that there's a law about it. They could probably make the guns. They can't make the guns. A good criminal could make the guns. Even if the ones that they had manufactured a company are taken away, they'll be able to make illegal ones. Just a simple way to shut down people that are super in support of gun control is a simple argument. Is that, well, I guess drug laws are allowed to make sure that we never see drugs again. When's the last time we've seen drugs on the shelves? They're completely illegal, but they're still all over the place. Of course, though, the drug trade, like I said, is being controlled by the big cartel that is the CIA and those smaller cartels. So there are law enforcement have no, for the most part, have no intention of actually ending the drug trade in America because it makes a lot of money for the government and it's a lot of revenue coming in when they actually get caught. Because of course, there's money to be made at many different ends of the spectrum. But of course, when somebody gets caught, they have to pay a lot of fees and stuff like that. So they're going to make money if they are selling. They're going to make money if they're not selling. They're in jail. And when you look at the war on drugs is really a war on marijuana. That's what they really have went after over the years. And look what they've done to the states. They've really put the pressure on the states that have legalized marijuana into the owners of marijuana in the states. Like I said, it's absolutely ridiculous what they've done in Colorado and Oregon and stuff, and these few other states. Like I think definitely better than the policies of having it legal like it is in other states in the country. But it's definitely it's not perfect because it should be treated like a plant. I am not against the fact of, I love this feeling. marijuana being sold right next to your tomatoes and your potatoes at the farmer's market. That'd be a perfect world. Well, not that alone, but in a perfect world, that would be how it'd be. Is that you go to the farmer's market, you can go grab some tomatoes, grab some potatoes, and right next to all that is right next to your potatoes and tomatoes, some dank weed. And there should be no rules on growing it as long as it's not genetically modified or anything like that. And I think that's one horrible thing that might happen with legalization is that a big corporation might get a hold of it and start genetically modifying it and putting GMOs on the weed, which could actually have very different effects. Might not even have the same effects that people are used to, and might actually make weed no longer medicinally beneficial. That's the funny thing is that studies have proven that even if you don't smoke it or you don't do it for non-beneficial, just recreational purposes, you still get the medicinal benefits either way. Like you don't have to like really do any like specific regimen of it or whatever to get the medicinal benefits. Like many pharmaceutical pills that do not work that way, if you take them a certain way or whatever, and there's no recreational doing it. It's like, and it also not very bad for you. Marijuana, you can do it recreational, and you still get the medicinal benefits. And of course, there's a lot more if you do, like, for example, people that have skin cancers and stuff like that. They're advised to do like the oils and stuff, and they rub it on their skin on the troubled areas, and a lot of times it closes it and completely heals ailment on their skin. Because that's the healing power of it. Like I said, 34 compounds of cancer, glaucoma, irritable bowel syndrome, many other physical ailments, many mental ailments. People have been lied to that for many years, and the war on drugs that really started in the 70s. Well, it had been preceded for many years for the fact on the war of marijuana that went back from the 30s when William Randolph Hearst and all these and these people that in the lumber industry that didn't want to see marijuana legalized because of the hemp and the industrial benefits. I mean, the fact that this plant could also replace so many industrial uses alarmed many industrialists, and they didn't want it to be legalized, so they started making all these lies about it. And they started saying that this could lead to all kinds of stuff. I mean, they even equated marijuana during the time of the Cold War with communism. They equate it with anything. Anything that was bad, marijuana was equated with. And they used that in the 30s because we still have many racist attitudes. They scared people, and they told them that it would enable black men to. They told them that it would enable black men to rape white women. It was one of the main accusations towards marijuana. One of the reasons that they said it should not remain legal like it had been for many years before that. I mean, it was legal all the way up to that point in the 1930s. But the 1937 was officially legalized. But before that, I mean, it was actually given in the 1800s and stuff as medicine. It was a very effective medicine. But, excuse me. But in 1937, after the smear campaign and Reefer Madness, and after all that happened, it was made illegal. To no one's surprise, because at that time people were a bit more gullible. I don't think that the same things would work, but in that way they weren't. They were less gullible. They just had different tactics to work back then. I think with some similar tactics and stuff like that, and we were at the same spot when it comes to our ideas on marijuana then, if it were here today in 2016. I think some very easy tactics they could do a similar thing. And I think they're going to do a similar thing here to re-legalize in the places that's already legal. Talking about, because I think that, for one, I'm going to call right here, is that they're going to say that these edibles are too dangerous, and that having all these edibles out here and that we're just going to stop it by completely legalizing it, because they're going to they talk about these stories about these many people went into the hospital. They even say that people died, which is impossible. But people go in the hospital, yeah, that's possible. People freak out on the edibles and stuff like that, especially if they're accidentally consumed. But with the scare tactics or whatever, and some scary statistics on the news and maybe some studies, people will be definitely in support of it. I mean, everybody believes anything in this country if you say that there's a damn study behind it. A study proves this, a study proves that. If you say it on the news, the news watchers will believe anything if you follow with that. I've seen stuff. What's really funny is when you see like on the news, something's obvious. A new study proves that stress may reduce your lifespan. It's like, okay, tell us something we don't know. Oh, a new study says that it's like, just this. They'll say something completely so obvious. Exercise might actually be beneficial to your lifestyle. I'm like, okay. I've actually seen a couple of this. I mean, that's just the half dementiaed out writers of Bay News 9 here in the Bay Area. Maybe they just put this stuff. Maybe I don't know. Maybe to appeal to the old people here that are kind of have the dementia or whatever. They need to be reminded of stuff all the time. So they put these very obvious facts out there, and then the bad thing is that even as local news, they'll cover international events quite often, and then they just put the same crap from CNN and Fox. Even less information and even more biased. It seems like that's how it works here in Florida. Which it's pretty hard to get even less information and more biased than the big three: MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News. Which, lovely Fox News. I mean, talk about the war on drugs. Haven't they been? There's been lovely throughout the whole epidemic of drugs in the last few years, because they always blame it on something. Or well, just all the mainstream media in general have some ridiculous conclusion. I've heard some ridiculous stuff like on Fox News about these are just those trendy liberals that are that they're bringing into America, or that they're pushing our young people, and also it's illegal immigrants, and also what makes this unclear is that a lot of those illegal immigrants are running from the very cartels that the government is funding. It's like people, even in the truth movement, complain a lot about the illegal immigration. The illegal immigrants that are coming to this country, a lot of them, I mean, some of them, there's drug cartel members mixed into the crowd, but a lot of them are running from the very drug cartels because their countries became practically inhospitable thanks to drug cartels running around those northern border cities that the United States government funded and had funded for the last 30 years plus. And it's the same deal now also, and we're not even having that much of immigration from Mexico. We're having a lot more from Central America, where the drug cartel problem has become exacerbated and has become similar to the drug cartel problem in Mexico, in countries like Honduras or Guatemala to the south of Mexico. We see this phenomenon happening. But in countries like Venezuela and stuff like that, in Argentina for many years, they have somewhat quelled that problem compared to what it used to be back in the 70s and 80s in South America. And now with a potential Operation Condor style operation from the continent happening, now we're seeing the possibility of a resurgence of a drug trade down there, considering that is where the start of it is. That's where where it's produced, where the coca is produced. And the coca leaves itself, if you chew on them, it doesn't have the same effect as cocaine. It's actually cocaine is a refined form of the coca plant, which the coca plant itself, actually the native people Bolivia, they chew it and it just gives you a little buzz, and it helps with altitude sickness and such. And actually, that's why people wonder why like, Evo Morales celebrates the coca leaf. The coca leaf doesn't mean there what it means here. And I think Evo Morales at one time did realize that, and I think that's why he gave it as a joke. He gave a guitar as a coca leaf to George Bush, which is pretty funny if you realize it, if you know about George Bush's history, because he was a massive cokehead when he was young. I guess the only way more to be you may also allude to also the fact that he was a notorious drunk, and that he claimed that he had quit drinking in the 90s or stuff like that. But I saw something telling me that he continued well past then. So he was quite the partier when he was younger. He was known when he was younger for drinking a ton, smoking a lot of dope, and doing a lot of coke back in the 60s. So I guess the guitar from Evo Morales, that little gift, I think it's kind of like, I think Evo Morales did a similar thing to the Pope. You know, people took it as a different way, but when Evo Morales gave to the Pope a present, but it was a crucifix. Okay, seems like an adequate present to a Christian religious leader, quotation Christian. Was the gift, but it's a crucifix is like a hammer and sickle. They like formed a hammer and sickle. And the Pope had the weirdest look when he was receiving that. Like he didn't. You could tell he definitely did not enjoy receiving the hammer and sickle crucifix. I think Evo Morales kind of enjoyed it a little bit himself, watching the Pope's reaction, kind of probably like how he liked it when he saw Bush, probably his face when he received a coca leaf, reminding him of the good old days. I also remember Bush was a cheerleader. He's quite the character. And then when he was president, he gave us quite a bit of laughs. I mean, at times, yeah, that's the only thing I'll probably miss looking back at the Bush administration. You know, when we look at 8 years later, whatever. I mean, it doesn't seem like we have quite the funny moments as Obama. I mean, he just all we seem to see was him with a bunch of stuttering as his speeches and him attempting to be funny. But since he's attempting to do it, it's not quite as funny as Bush not attempting to be funny. But it just happens with stuff like getting locked out in Japan. Remember that? I mean, he was in Japan, and he was trying to leave after a speech, and the door was locked. And he looks back at the audience. He gives the funniest look. It's like just slowly looks back. He's like, it's like, guys, this isn't funny. But he actually, it's like, I meant to do that. Well, I'm gonna start doing Bush impressions. I meant to do that. I just thought it'd be a little funny to play around with you Japanese folk. And it's like he probably when he went to Japan, he probably was all nervous because what his father ended up doing to the Japanese prime minister. I mean, people forgot about that. that one's pretty funny. Well, that's one of the funniest things that's ever happened with a American head of state anywhere. Where George H.W. Bush. He started. Remember that he had the bad Japanese food or whatever, and he just started puking all over the Japanese prime minister, like he puked on him. And then you see like Barbara Bush reach back, or reach in front with a napkin, trying to stop him from puking more on the Japanese prime minister. And then after that, I think he passed out or something. He just like he was really sick after eating whatever shit that. He was eating, I don't know, maybe he had like a really spoiled sushi roll or something like that. Or maybe just by having to be by Barbara Bush. Or having to be, or just being himself. I mean, being George H.W. Bush seems pretty disgusting. I mean, now George H.W. Bush just looks like an absolute, it really looks trippy. Especially now that he's got the, I don't know, with him being bald now, he's got to be close to croaking now. H.W. Bush was we came after all that Iran's Contra scandal and all that stuff, and then that was all. Then ultimately, the weird thing was that was just a few years after the part of the Iran Contra scandal was supposed to be about our involvement in the Iraq-Iran war, where we were supporting Iraq in that war, and then they ended up invading Iraq just a few years later. In fact, '87 is when the gas and the Kurds happened. And the United States would go 4 years later, and the United States gave the green light on gas and the Kurds. In fact, the United States gave the green light on Saddam invading Kuwait. It was like literally like the United States was officially allies with Iraq all the way up till just a few days after, or a few days before the invasion, and then all of a sudden they switched to being official on the books, being against Saddam Hussein, and then they quit the invasion about halfway through when Saddam set his gas fields on fire, and they were putting that out years later. So it left it, because these were big oil fields, and set them on fire. It just left a big mess. And I guess because there was no oil to get, I guess the United States didn't have any tension states. So they came back 12 years later and got the oil, got all the gold, and got the supposed weapons of mass destruction. By weapons of mass destruction, that was probably also the hundreds that Saddam had stashed in his palace. And forget about that. He had tons of $100 bills that. Remember, the United States soldiers were giving out the $100 bills to people that would talk. Probably stuff just Saddam's money that they were handing out. With H.W. Bush, he was president at a turning point for the United States, because the United States was no longer had the Soviet boogeyman. Now it started going to the Muslim boogeyman. And with the Iraq war happening, and let's not forget what happened to the soldiers that were there, is that the United States used depleted uranium, which if you're not familiar with depleted uranium, that's uranium from nuclear power plants and stuff that they put at the tips of a weapon, or at the tips of the projectiles and stuff that they were flinging at Iraq, and all the shells and all their bombs. They were using it all over the place, and it did not only did it get the people sick, 1 million Iraqis sick there was what's been dubbed as Gulf War syndrome. It's also gotten a lot of the soldiers sick. They now have what's been dubbed as Gulf War syndrome, which is really a combination of quite a few things. It's probably a combination of uranium poisoning. There's also the chemical weapons that were blown up near them. There was also possible biological warfare use. But because of that use of depleted uranium, the first Iraq war is actually declared a nuclear war. And that's when people don't realize that complete awful nature of the Iraq war that's going on today. And they forget that this is ultimately a nuclear war, with the same kind of fallout happening in places as happened during the last two interventions in Iraq of a nuclear bomb being used, and also the same type of, giant explosions, like what you would see after a nuclear bomb going off, like big mushroom clouds, because these big, what they call MOABs, it's pretty much just like a Volkswagen-sized bomb, and it's a conventional weapon. It's not a nuclear weapon. But if you use the MOAB, and then you use the depleted uranium that you shot from a shell or something in the same city, you're going to have a nuclear type fallout, and you're going to have a big blast damage, like the size of a nuclear weapon, as if one went off. So ultimately, you're going to have in that city the same kind of damage as if a nuclear weapon went off. Like, it was a big, may not like an ICBM, but it's definitely a smaller nuclear weapon. You also, not all nuclear weapons blow up entire cities, or blow up, some nuclear weapons can do a lot more than blow up a city. They can blow up like half a state or something. Like some of the bigger ones that the U.S. built towards the end of the Cold War and such. But all that aside, uh, Reagan kind of was like the godfather of the modern United States drug trade policy. As it's like, okay, we're not really going to keep it too secret, but the United States is involved in the drug trade, but we're going to pretend to fight them, and then we're going to have our leaders that have this puppets down there in Mexico, pretend to be fighting these drug cartels, but the truth is they'll be supporting these drug cartels. And look at El Chapo has been in and out of prison down there in Mexico. There's all the proof that the Mexican military is not really fighting the drug cartels in Mexico, and that these other drug cartels are not being fought in whatever countries. The Cuban cartel, while we took them all in practically to Miami, and now they're here in the United States, they kind of fell apart in the 80s, I guess, by competition. I think the Colombians, I don't know, I think that they kind of neutralize each other. For example, the Colombians don't have nearly the power that they used to have back then. The Colombian cartel, they had $30 million value cartel, or no, $30 billion value just by Pablo Escobar. That was his own net worth. Cartel itself probably worse than who knows what. The Pablo Escobar had $30 billion. He's one of the most infamous characters in the entire narco-trafficking trade. But again, isn't it goes back to the boogeyman theory? I mean, it's like they had that in Colombia. They did the same thing. The Colombian government had down there as, look, it's like, well, if the Colombian government falls, you'll be stuck with Pablo Escobar as your leader, which there was actually a lot of Colombians actually almost have rather had that. I mean, Pablo Escobar had gained a lot of popularity as a politician, and there was a lot of talk about him in the 80s as being possibly a president of Colombia one day. He had so much power that he was put in a prison that he built. He built his own prison that he would stay in because he just had that much money to do so. This shows the incredible incredible power that somebody like that must have if they're being put away into. I mean, it was like I don't know. It's like, I'm pretty sure he actually ultimately left that prison too, and then in 1994 the CIA assassinated him. It was which was just kind of like a novelty bust because it was just purely for show. Say, oh look, we actually got one of them. We got Pablo Escobar. We got the boogeyman. It's like when Bin Laden had been working with the United States government for many years, and when they finally got Bin Laden in 2011, if that's actually the real story. I mean, there's a lot of evidence that Bin Laden was captured in 2011, and probably died before that. And that the fact that 24 out of 30 Navy SEALs are dead that went to capture Bin Laden, they all died. A lot of them died on a helicopter crash a few months later. That's suspicious. I wonder what probably happened to the people that killed Pablo Escobar. I mean, that probably only a few of those guys are still around. Definitely a few of those guys are dead. I can tell you that. There's probably I didn't research actually who killed Pablo Escobar, but probably those guys are probably not around or been sworn to secrecy because they're not gonna. They don't want them telling the truth if there was some deal was struck and they let Pablo Escobar go to some island or whatever, or they might actually did kill him and then they killed him. And it was just so because they had to, because it was kind of like the effect of Noriega, putting him in jail. Which Pablo Escobar and Noriega used to be the best friends trading. Noriega was his connection to the north of Noriega, went to the Contras and then went to different groups throughout Central America, similar to the Contras, and it went up to Mexican cartel and then up to the United States where it'd be distributed between different street dealers and cartels, or the Mexican cartel in the Southwest that has been there quite a while. And it's been, again, glamorized, hasn't it, by our media to some extent? With making it seem like almost like a cool thing that was put into, was a difference between, the street Mexican culture of the Southwest and being openly supportive of the different gangs in the Southwest that had ultimately connected Mexican cartel. And some of them, and you see some of our media and have done that. And I see these TV shows where they seem to be almost glamorized the drug trade. And actually, seem to be putting like a step-by-step manual practically on TV of how to sell drugs pretty much and how to become a successful drug dealer. Which I don't think it do anything good. And really questioning, here's what was my first thing, is that Americans would eat that up and would say, oh, look, it looks how they actually talk to these drug dealers. How are they able to actually talk in person to the drug dealers and put them on a TV show? And this was my question. I was like, wait a minute, if these drug dealers are on TV, you know that show they can be held confidentiality with everyone else, but if the police or anybody asks about who these people are, they have to give it up, or they're going to be declared accomplices in the crime of whatever crimes they've committed. They'll do stuff like even go to their compound or trap house or whatever, and that would definitely somebody would ask about that. Probably even those people, you think that these you think that if a drug dealer's approach to here's another thing is the major one. Really out of the two, the med police don't really have any interest in catching these people. Okay, but what about this? Is that a cop? The producer goes up to the drug dealer and says, "Oh, would you like to do a TV show about selling drugs?" That guy would sprint the other way, or might have you killed. But I think they would probably sprint the other way. They'd think you're a cop. So it's weird. How people's perception of how the drug trade works is a bit skewed because the media has put stuff that it has to be unrealistic. That's not real life. People's these TV shows that are supposed to be about real groups, real drug cartels and stuff like that. The biggest point I probably should be taken about this show is that the drug war is not about the actual fight against the drug trade. The drug war is a fight on marijuana and personal freedom, and it was in a way the start, a predecessor to the war on terrorism, to the justification of the losing of civil rights of the American people. With that, police were able to do stuff that they were never able to do before. Once the drug war was actually declared officially. Remember, there's the big effort of getting people to be drug free, but ultimately, usually, it was just targeted marijuana usage, because they kept called for so many years a gateway drug, and which was a complete lie. And now they're admitting that's a lie, and the truth is that, like I said, Ritalin and alcohol, that's your two gateway drugs in America. And alcohol is the obvious gateway drug. People might disagree, but a lot of people can control themselves. But I still think that people's inhibitions do, like science proves, gets a little bit skewed. The inhibitions are a bit lowered, and once you hear sometimes people are drunk say, "Oh, let's do coke" or something like that. Let's do coke, but you never hear somebody that's stoned or something. That's super stoned say anything like that. Now they'll probably tell you that they want to order a pizza or that they want to watch a marathon on Netflix, but nothing like that. That's what it's a gateway to. I guess they can be argued that's not a good gateway either. But to sit on the couch or watch TV, it might also be a gateway to some really great stuff, like sit down in nature and just enjoying a beautiful day with the sun out, and you really see the greens and all the colors, just seem to be a lot more vivid, don't they? Or a gateway to, let's just say it right. Let's just say it straight up: is that a gateway to great sex with your girlfriend? I think it just makes your whole sensations. It makes your sensations of pleasure, whether it's your visuals or your actually your skin itself feel. All of it's a lot more sensitive. It's a lot more heightened. Sensitivity is a lot more heightened. But with all the great things that it is, it's illegal in this country. And illegal in many countries around the world. But many countries there's criminalization, and it's not fully illegal like here, or they look the other way. And that's how the law was for many years in Canada. But in the United States, South Carolina, there's a no tolerance policy, and they'll put people away for life. There's guys that have been put away for life in this country. It's absolutely ridiculous when we have the justice system is set up that way. Well, we have, like, for example, this billionaire that raped, I think, his 3-year-old daughter, not just 3 months or something like that. 3 months, I believe. And I think I've seen 2 cases like that. Sexual assault against a very young child. These two billionaires, right? The same billionaire, so. And then they ultimately only did 3 months. Or sometimes they'll just get like a fine or something like that, like a big fine. But to them, it's not a big fine. It's like, oh, look, they had to pay $150,000, which to them, $150,000. Just breaks it down mathematically. $1 million, that $150,000 is only about, $100,000 is 1/10,000 of their money. So that's like a normal person spending $1. That's saying that's if saying if you do have 10,000 in the bank, which that's not a normal person. I think most Americans have something like, a lot of Americans, the amount of Americans that have like $80 or less in the bank has like really shot up in recent years. And the amount of Americans that live on $2 or less a day has quadrupled in the last 20 years, which you forget that people do live on such low amounts of money, which they're talking about homeless people. And there's certain homeless people, I guess, that are literally only able to spend $2 or less a day. Sometimes homeless people, I see them, just throw cans or whatever and stuff like that. They can't even get any begging money. They're not allowed to panhandle in many cities. In a lot of cities that take cop panhandling, they're sent right to jail. In a city in South Carolina, actually, I think it was like South Carolina in general, they're giving them 2 options. You either go to jail, or they're sending homeless people already. The FEMA camps are open. They've already sent homeless people to them in one state, in South Carolina. People believe the FEMA camps are a conspiracy. We'll just look it up. There's the pictures and everything. You can even go visit it yourself if you want to. There's you might be turned away or something, get too close to it, I guess. There's like 800 of them across North America. I don't think necessarily all of them are in the United States. And like there's 3 in Florida that I've seen. And you can see all the locations on Google. It's pretty visible on Google Maps. They don't really have it much of a secret. It's even on the bills that passed through Congress and the Senate that they'll say that they'll do this in the case of a massive political dissidents. They'll start rounding up and arresting people in the name of national security. They'll be putting away troubled individuals in the name of national security. That's the kind of terms that's the kind of terms they use. This country, when I say that it's near full fascism, it is at full fascism. People don't believe me. People think I'm exaggerating, but I'm not exaggerating. What the question is, if we're going to be turned into a full military junta, it's not very far, because you already see like Operation Jade Helm. That was what I was training for. Operation Jade Helm 2015. And some people thought it was going to turn into actually martial law itself, but I think they're going to wait till the next president to do that.
Hey, Chris.
When Hillary Rodham Clinton is the president, then they'll probably push martial law on us. and a world war will probably start when the United States invades Syria and Iran. It's going to get serious, and don't say that. Don't say that you weren't warned. You know, the people that are completely asleep. Because the truth community, that's what one of the main things they've been trying to do is push the info. And how I see it is, I like to push out the info because some people will go off the grid, some people will stay in their neighborhoods and fight, and some people leave the country. But for them to not have that option, that would be the worst thing. Is that they should get the info and be able to make that option on themselves, because wouldn't that be the worst thing? Is that it just happens to them and they can't make an option because they're forced to be in a suburb or something that's been completely locked down and they have nowhere to go. There's some places here in America that'd be really horrible to get caught in the situation of martial law or a similar event because there'd be no escape. For example, Peninsula or whatever, where there's only one road out or something like that. You probably don't want to be there, but if you're out in the middle of nowhere practically, you can get off the grid easily. That's not too big of a deal. Some people probably should just leave the country altogether. But we're going to need a lot of people here for a revolution when it happens. And I don't think I'm a dreamer for believing that revolution is possible because there's been very unlikely odds in the past against revolutions.
Hey, Chris.
And if happened. I heard. Hey, Vince, is that you?
Yeah, hey, brother. I wanted to I want to lend in an observation about the Jade Helm. I think the main objective there was generally an acclamation for the people to accept the infrastructure being, kind of outwardly monitored and controlled and getting people used to, military on the streets against, of course, posse comitatus. Also, in relation to the drug war, you can trace the roots back, of course, back to Great Britain and their empire and the Opium Wars. And involvement in that is even goes back beyond Prescott Bush and his ancestors, and their participation in that is main leaders. And then on down the line, you see the transfer of OSS to the CIA when it was created. The Bush is, of course, heavily involved in that. It's I hope I can say this right. What Hal called he called cockratocracy, but actually it was taken out of the dictionary about 100 years ago, and it's basically it means that a ruling by corrupt people, and the opposite, of course, would be anarchy, which is so often misunderstood. That means no rulers. The government has positioned itself to be rulers over the people as opposed to being a representative for the people. So the idea of government is not even a good word to use, but the corruption, they're a mafia, and they eliminate their competition and allow for fees from like the cartels, as you were talking about, to operate under them. So it's the secret government that is really in control, and family lines. Not using conspiracy theory, but I forget who I heard that from, but the use of the word networking. So when you say that people in high positions of power that sit in seats of decision operate in a network of insiders, and that results in the perversion of law to becoming legal. And the idea of making something legal just adds more power to them that they can regulate that. And when you can make as much or more money by regulation and fees and all the hidden taxes and so forth, then it's a good idea then for that control power to shift towards legalization, which, like I said, it's legal as law and all that set as precedent. A big part of what's against.
Well, it's ridiculous how much money that the government's going to make off the Colorado legalization, and all the rules that have been put. I mean, if you just look at the rules that have been put on legalization, there, it's staggering. Like there's all these people that are wanted to just grow and wanted to make a living for themselves. We're gonna have some problems, and they've made it so hard on them, and they can't even put their money away in a bank or anything like that. I mean, there's no banks that will carry co-op money from marijuana co-ops and stuff like that, because of course the FDIC and the federal government, that's illegal money, and which is kind of bad because they have to guard the money very closely, because sometimes they are making very large amounts of money. They're susceptible to being robbed and stuff like that. But that's the least of it. What's really bad is that they're being limited in what they can grow, what type of stuff they can grow, the people that are using it, if they use it in the wrong spot. I mean, you don't. The law specifically, I think, says your porch. So even if you're in your yard or something like that, you're taking out your trash or something like that, and you're going to be burning one, and you're no longer on your porch. Cop pulls by. Well, guess what? He could still arrest you. So and really, when I think about that, it's like, wait a minute. So they pretty much say in your house. Wasn't that the law before? I mean, technically it was illegal, but if you never got caught inside your house. You know, you always got caught somewhere. I mean, the only thing that's preventing, I guess, is like you get caught. You know how you used to do it when it's illegal, bringing it back to your house or whatever. But it seems to still going to bring in a lot of revenue for cases and stuff like that. And I think it's going to cause a lot of revenue. People are going to get confused, and people are going to get arrested. And they got court cases, and there's a court case that brings in money for the government for you to pay the court fees and all that, and pay fines or whatnot afterwards. I mean, that's why I agree with decriminalization. That people say, well, decriminalization, not legalization. But decriminalization, they still can fine you heavily. Sometimes they can give $500 fine or something like that. It's still a way for the government to make money off of a non-crime. Because really, a crime to be committed, there has to be a victim. There's no victim in that. All that is a state-mandated law that you violate. It's a violation of an ordinance, really, is what happened. Crime is more somebody's property, somebody got hurt. That's pretty much really what, when you talk about the moral definition of crime is, not by what this hocus-pocus legal system that we have, where we have a lot of where you have all this legalese and endless law code, where you have to study for years and years and years just to understand just a portion of the laws. I don't think lawyers know the entire law code. They don't even know a third of it. I mean, there's so many damn laws in this country. I don't think any country has more laws than us. And that includes Middle Eastern, countries like Saudi Arabia, or that includes China even. I don't think they have as many laws. They at least have it simplified, even though that they do have serious penalties when you do break one of the laws. I'm just saying is that you could break a law in this country and you don't even know it. Also, yeah, you make a good point about I didn't even think about it. The British, they were doing the same kind of things as the opium trade, and it reminds me of the story about the British, during the opium war. They get the people dependent because they were pretty much behind the opium trade in the world at that time, and during the British Empire. Over in China, they got the Chinese addicted a lot of them. They tried to encourage the addiction to opium so they could later sell it to them during the 1800s, and kind of as their empire was fading, the British seemed to be really relying. But I think it went back many years. It probably went back. I mean, that's the making money off of. Off a drug war. Yeah, it's kind of really the British Empire's idea. The British, when you look at the American government and what they do, they're kind of just replicated what many of the same tactics of what the British government used to do. And I say it a lot of times is that the British government kind of handed the torch to the United States government in the 1900s kind of after World War I, that's when it kind of was decided that the United States government would receive the torch of what the British Empire used to be.
Perfect.
So the world really.
I'm really glad you straightened that out. I said Bush, and their ancestors. Prescott was a surname prior to Bush, and I forget the family name that went on down to the Prescotts, and of course the Bush's offspring. But let me just say real quick before we run out of time, and I'm gonna hand you back the mic. Stick around to UCY.tv. Awesome, great programming here. Not programming, broadcast. Okay. Nathan Frazier is next, and hey, come back in the morning and catch a past cast from Hal Anthony at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time or Daylight Savings Time. I haven't changed my clock, so that's one of my rebellions. And then right after that, we've got Jules Before the First Cut. Of course, everybody listening should know. If they don't, she is the founder of UCY.tv and the flagship program, which airs at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. So, hey, thanks for everybody for listening, participating in chat, and welcome for to the listeners that came over from Real Liberty Media and on the redirect here for the show. Appreciate all you listeners and everybody in chat. Keep coming back. It only works if you do.
Yep, thanks everyone for listening today to this program of Voice of Rebellion Radio. Yeah, definitely catch one of the shows, catch a Jules show in the morning, because she ultimately put in all the work and made all the people that have had a radio broadcasting opportunity here at UCY possible by creating this network. So definitely show your support by listening to one of her shows tomorrow in the morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. That's 9 a.m. Central Time, 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 7 a.m. Arizona Time, and Pacific Time, because if you know, Arizona doesn't, they're weird. They're Mountain Time technically, but they never spring forward. It's kind of weird. Florida's might be on weird policy soon. So there might be the case at times we'll be 2 hours ahead of you guys out there in Arkansas, because they might say we might be permanently on the spring forward. So, which I actually kind of dig that, because I hate when it gets dark at 6 a.m. or 6 p.m. And that's usually when I'm like, actually feel like, I feel like I just get up around 2, 3 in the afternoon. I'm a really kind of a night owl. So when it gets dark at 6 p.m. and I already stuck to be inside, can't really do anything. Can't do what I would do in the daytime or something. That kind of sucks. But anyways, I'm going to wrap this up by saying subscribe to Chris Jackson Rojas on Facebook, where I post a lot of stuff throughout the day. Tons of articles throughout the day. Do some live podcasts throughout the week. And next week will be May 1st. I don't have any topics set yet, so you can look on my Facebook page later for some info. I'll try this time to put it on Wednesday. Actually, that's my goal, is to try to put the details about the show on Wednesday. And that gives plenty of time for me to promote it and for people to get the word around about the show. Just keep in mind that the war on drugs, it's like the war on terrorism. It's not a war on the actual drug trade or a war on terrorism. It's actually it's a war on something else. It's the war on drugs. It can be more specifically a war on marijuana, but it's also a war on your own personal freedoms. We're here in the last about 20 seconds of the show, so thanks for tuning in. And catch tomorrow, 10 a.m. Jules on here on UCY, and also subscribe to me on Facebook, Chris Jackson Rojas. And thanks, and all the people that listen to the show today.
Point of no return, and nobody can stop it. Malcolm Little, when he knelt before Elijah Muhammad, the comet that killed the dinosaurs, changing the earth. They love to criticize, they always say I changed for the worse. Like prescription pills, when you misusing them, nigga. The Templar Knights when they took Jerusalem, nigga, and figured out what was buried under Solomon's temple. Al-Aqsa, the name is not coincidental. I know too much, the government is trying to murder me. No coming back like cutting your wrists open vertically. How could the serpent be purposely put in charge of the country? Genetic engineered sickness spread amongst me. My people are so hungry that they attack without reason, like a fucking dog ripping off the hand that feeds him. Immortal technique is treason to the Patriot Act. So come and get me, motherfucker, cause I'm not coming back. This is the point from which I can never return, and if I back down now, then